It ended up being, I think, a total of 5 rejections by the Office of the DPP
Yep.
of a submission for a prosecution before, in December 2018, the DPP saying to Scott Cook, who was then the commander
Yep.
of the homicide squad, yes, we think you can now prosecute him. In December 2018, when that call was made, I had no idea that that decision was pending. I was producing with Slade Gibson the 16th and final episode of the podcast. And so you had a situation where at the end of this series, the police were crossing the border and going to a house in Runaway Bay to put the cuffs on Chris Dawson for a 36-year-old murder. And, there will forever be, I think, a question that will be asked but possibly not answered. What was it? Was it the podcast? Why did the DPP change its mind after 36 years and 5 previous rejections? Legal professional privilege, the DPP doesn't have to say what it was. I wonder whether it was the number of new statements that were generated and became part of the brief that the DPP considered, statements that came as a result of people listening to the podcast and contacting me and me referring them to the police, and statements that were taken from people who listened to the podcast and didn't contact me and went straight to the police. One of those persons was a guy who used to play football with the Dawsons, and he's the guy who said that he was approached by Chris several years before Lynn disappeared because Chris wanted to get rid of his wife.
Right.
And that was at a time when Lynn couldn't have children.
Yep.
Chris's brother Paul had children.
Yeah.
Chris couldn't imagine being a father, being a twin, but not having kids like his brother. He was always trying to compete with and be the same as his brother. And the allegation was that he wanted his wife rubbed out because she was biologically unable, it seemed at the time, to have kids.
Yeah.
And that statement from a bloke called Silkman was taken in late 2018, not that long before the decision was made. And when the DPP opened its case in the murder trial in 2022, the then Crown Prosecutor, Craig Everson, who is now a District Court judge, he opened it with Silkman.
A very good prosecutor too.
Very good prosecutor, did an amazing job. But he opened his case with Silkman. Now, ultimately, the trial judge, Ian Harrison, completely discounted Silkman, didn't consider Silkman's evidence as probative and, effectively sidelined it. But it was kind of immaterial. Was Silkman and his evidence
the catalyst that got it before the court?
And in which case Silkman wouldn't have come forward if it hadn't been for the podcast, which triggered him to mention this recollection to another police officer who contacted Unsolved Homicide and said, you might want to follow up this bloke who told me this.
Yeah. I think the police, and this is a classic example, have got to come to terms with this is the new frontier. This is you're going to have to work out ways of dealing with it. It appears that the way that you guys you manage with the police at the podcast stage, it worked. The publicity that came about it was overcome by a judge-only trial, as I understand. It was a judge-only trial.
Yeah, but I think it could have also been a jury trial, and the court said he could get a fair trial before a jury. It was Chris Dawson's election to have it before a judge alone, and that made it, I think, certainly faster. We didn't have delays with the jurors having to go out of the room.
For the voir dire.
And we were able to do a podcast called The Teacher's Trial with an episode every week dealing with the unfolding murder trial. We couldn't have done that if there were jurors involved.
What transpired. How did you feel when the result came down?
so relieved.
Because there would have been pressure, there would have been criticism of you or getting involved. I would imagine defence would be going, well, how can we have a fair trial? How can we do this because of the podcast?
Yeah. Look, I think it would have been devastating for Lynn's family if there had been a not guilty verdict delivered. But inevitably, I'm sure there would have also been people, with the wisdom of hindsight and the safety and sanctuary of, commenting and commentating from their desks about all of the journalism that I'd done and how that had ruined the case.
Yeah.
There would have been all of these, what do you call them, Monday morning quarterbacks, giving you a piece of their mind, how, it probably would have even been, distorted into this was going to be an absolute certain conviction, and then this Queensland rogue journalist came along and stuffed it all up for the police. So who knows how it could have been spun. But I thought it was going to become potentially, a very ugly stain on the newspaper, which didn't deserve that. We'd started this with the right intentions. 2 coroners, long before, I did the podcast, believed that the evidence was powerful and sufficient for a jury to find him guilty. And, I hadn't just, stumbled into this case and come to a conclusion that wasn't supported by evidence or anything like that. It was one that had been, I think, very, what's the right word, wrongfully handled by the office of the DPP for years.
Yeah.
And we don't know and may never know why the office of the DPP failed to prosecute for all of the previous occasions. Again, they've got legal professional privilege. They don't have to say. But is there a big fault in the system there with a lack of accountability? You're made to be accountable, Gary, as a copper.
Yeah.
I'm made to be accountable as a journalist. You're made to be accountable now as a podcaster. If you make a mistake and you go back over your files and you say, well, this is what happened or that happened, I do that. But there isn't that mechanism in the office of the DPP.
Not the transparency.
Yeah.
Look, I've had a case, and I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to open up old wounds, but a high-profile case that was knocked back time and time again, and then all of a sudden we're going to trial on it. And it might have coordinated with got some public profile and mentioned in the media, and all of a sudden, okay, we can go to trial now. It's things like that happen.